Welcome back to Horror Galaxy. Tonight I have 6 scary true snowy night horror stories for you. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed, because once you step onto the Horror Galaxy, you don't walk alone. The plow blade jolted as it hit something solid, and my hands tightened on the wheel before my mind caught up. I leaned forward, squinting through the swirling white, heart already thudding faster than the engine. I eased off the throttle and felt the machine settle, blades scraping snow aside. When I climbed down, the wind bit into my face and filled my ears, but the shape ahead was unmistakable. A car sat half buried on the shoulder, roof and hood glazed over, as if it had been there for hours. I trudged closer, boots crunching. The driver's door was unlocked. When I pulled it open, warmth spilled out, fogging my breath. The seat was still warm. The radio on the dash hummed softly, static and faint music underneath. I called out, expecting someone to answer, but there was only the wind. I checked the back seat, the trunk, even crouched to look beneath the frame. Nothing. I stood there, confused, then chalked it up to someone walking for help. I shut the door, climbed back into the cab, and reported it. Dispatch crackled back, asking for coordinates. I gave them, my voice steady, professional. They said they would send someone later. I pushed the plow forward again, telling myself it was nothing. The road narrowed, trees closing in, and the world shrank to the beam ahead of me and the rhythm of blade and engine. Maybe 10 minutes later, the blade hit again. Same jolt, same sick feeling. I slowed, swore under my breath, and climbed down. Another car, same color, same model. Parked at the same angle, buried the same way. I walked around it slowly, a cold crawling up my spine. I opened the door. Warm, radio humming. No driver. I stood there longer this time, listening to my own breathing. I checked the license plate. Snow covered it, but I brushed it clean. The numbers matched the first one. I told myself I was tired, that snow and darkness were playing tricks on me. I snapped a flashlight on, walked farther down the road, expecting to see the first car behind me. There was nothing but plowed snow. Back in the cab, my hands shook as I called dispatch again. I told them I had found the same car twice. There was a pause on the line, then a different voice came through, asking me to repeat myself. I did. The voice said they had logged my first report, time-stamped earlier than I thought. They asked if I was feeling all right. I said I was. I wasn't. I kept going. Each kilometer felt longer. The engine noise became too loud, then too quiet. My thoughts looped, trying to make sense of what I had seen. When the blade struck a third time, I didn't curse. I just closed my eyes for a second, like a child refusing to look. It was there again. Same car, same warmth. This time, the driver's seatbelt was fastened, empty. I felt a pressure in my chest, a tightness that made it hard to breathe. I leaned into the car, feeling the heat, grounding myself in something real. That was when the radio crackled, louder than before, and a voice spoke clearly through the static. It said my name. I jumped back, slipping on the snow, nearly falling. The radio continued, listing details about my route, my vehicle, my shift. It sounded like dispatch, but wrong, flat, like it was being read. I ran back to the plow and slammed the door shut, hands trembling so badly I fumbled the mic. Dispatch answered before I spoke. They asked why I had stopped responding. I told them I had been talking to them the whole time. They said I hadn't checked in for over an hour. I argued, my voice rising, telling them about the car, about the radio. They told me to stay put, that someone was on the way. I looked at the clock on my dash. It didn't make sense. I felt suddenly exhausted, like I had been working far longer than I realized. I glanced in the side mirror and saw tracks behind me, plow marks looping back on themselves. The road ahead looked the same as the road behind. The radio crackled again, this time with my own voice, reporting the abandoned car. I stared at the speaker, my skin prickling. The voice went on, calm and routine, matching words I remembered saying. Then it cut off. I understood then, in a cold, sinking way. I wasn't finding the same car again and again. I was reaching the same point, over and over, stuck in a stretch of road that refused to let me pass. The car wasn't abandoned. It was a marker. I opened the door and stepped out one last time. The wind seemed to quiet, the world holding its breath. I walked to the car and opened it. This time, there was someone inside. He was slumped forward, hands on the wheel. I knew the shape of his shoulders, the worn jacket, the scar on his knuckle. It was me. The realization didn't come with panic. It came with a strange calm. I saw how it had happened. A drift too deep. A moment of distraction. The plow sliding, the impact. I had climbed out, confused, wandered the road, trying to finish a shift that was already over. Each loop, each report, was me circling the end. I closed the door gently. When I turned back to the plow, it was gone. So was the road. The cold finally reached me, deep and heavy. I thought about calling dispatch, about warning them, but there was nothing left to say. Later they told my family the plow had been found idling, blade buried, no sign of me. The radio logs showed my last transmission hours before my shift was supposed to start. They never found another car. I did reach the end of the road that night. It just wasn't the one I had been plowing. I was already halfway down the path when I noticed the sled pulling heavier than it should, the rope biting into my gloves as I leaned forward and put my weight into it. The firewood rattled behind me, stacked higher than my shoulders, and I remember thinking I should have taken 2 trips instead of 1. I stopped to catch my breath and looked back, mostly to check if anything had fallen off. That was when I saw the footprints. Mine were easy to recognize. Deep boot prints, spaced the way I always walked, toes turned slightly outward. But between them, perfectly centered, were bare footprints, smaller than mine, but not by much. Toes, heels, arches, all pressed cleanly into the snow, as if the person had just stepped out of warm water and onto the trail. I stared for a long moment, my breath fogging in front of me. I turned slowly, expecting to see someone standing there, maybe one of the older kids from a nearby house playing a joke. The path behind me was empty. No trees close enough to hide behind. No sound. Just smooth snow stretching back the way I had come. I looked down again. The bare footprints were gone. Only my boot prints remained, neat and ordinary. I laughed out loud, more from nerves than humor, and told myself the cold was messing with me. I pulled the sled again, faster this time, wanting to get the delivery over with. My grandfather's cabin was still ahead, smoke faint from the chimney, and I focused on that. A minute later, the sled jerked slightly, like it had bumped over something. I stopped again, annoyed now, and turned. The footprints were back. This time they were clearer. the toes sharply defined. They matched my stride exactly, one appearing every time my boot hit the snow. My stomach tightened. I crouched down and reached toward them, half expecting my fingers to go numb or sink through. Before I touched anything, I turned my head, slowly, listening. Still nothing. When I looked back down, the snow was smooth again. I didn't laugh this time. I stood up, heart beating faster, and started walking without stopping, dragging the sled hard enough that my shoulders burned. I kept my eyes forward, but I could feel something behind me. Not a presence exactly, more like awareness. Each step felt watched. The path curved slightly near a cluster of trees, and when I glanced down by accident, I caught a glimpse of pale shapes between my boots. Bare feet, keeping pace. I spun around so fast I nearly fell. The trail behind me was perfect, untouched except for my own tracks. I shouted then, just a sharp sound, testing the air. My voice sounded too loud, like it didn't belong out there. No one answered. I told myself to stop looking. I told myself if I didn't see it, it couldn't follow. The sled suddenly felt lighter. I stopped again, panic creeping up my throat, and turned. The firewood was still there, but the rope lay slack in the snow. Behind the sled, just for a second, I saw two bare feet standing still, toes pointed toward me. I blinked, and they were gone. I dropped the rope and backed away, my boots sliding. My chest hurt from breathing too fast. I thought about running, but the idea of turning my back on the path made my skin crawl. I grabbed the rope again, hands shaking, and pulled. With every step, I felt it. Not weight, not touch, just the certainty that something was moving where the sled had been, matching me perfectly. I stopped looking back. I watched my boots sink into the snow, counting steps in my head like it might keep me safe. When I reached the cabin, I nearly slammed into the door. I dropped the rope and ran inside, shouting for my grandfather. The warmth hit me like a wall, and my knees almost gave out. He came in from the back room, asking what was wrong, but I couldn't answer right away. He followed me outside when I finally told him about the footprints. He listened without interrupting, his face serious, and stepped onto the path. He knelt and brushed the snow with his glove. There were only my boot prints leading straight to the door. No bare feet. He looked at me for a long time and told me to sit down inside. Later, when the firewood was stacked and the door locked, he told me something he had never mentioned before. When he was a boy, delivering wood on the same path, he used to feel someone walking behind him too. He said the land remembers children who didn't make it home. I never delivered wood alone again. Even now, when snow falls quietly, I watch my steps, afraid of what might try to follow if I forget. The knocking started while I was leaning over the ledger, adding up cash by flashlight. The numbers blurring because my hands were cold and tired. It came from the wall behind the desk, a dull, hollow sound. 3 slow taps, like someone testing wood with their knuckles. I froze, pen hovering, and listened. When nothing followed, I told myself it was pipes contracting, the building settling under the weight of the storm. The phone rang before I could calm down. A man in room 7 said his heater was knocking and blowing cold air. He tried to laugh it off, but I heard the edge in his voice. I told him I would check it when I finished the count. Before I hung up, another call came through, then another. Different rooms, same complaint. Knocking inside the heaters, rhythmic, patient, like someone waiting for an answer. I grabbed the master keys and walked the hallway, my flashlight beam bouncing off closed doors. In room 7, the heater rattled softly, then knocked again, 3 taps from inside the unit. I crouched and put my ear close, feeling ridiculous. Then jumped back when the metal answered with another set of knocks, harder this time. I shut it off and told the guest to pile on blankets. He nodded too quickly, eyes fixed on the wall behind me. By the time I got back to the office, the power had been out long enough that the emergency lights were dimming. I sat behind the desk, rubbing my arms, listening to the building breathe. That was when the knocking came back, closer now, right behind my chair. 3 taps. A pause. 3 more. My stomach clenched. I stood up and pressed my palm against the wall. It was cold, solid. Nothing moved. I said hello softly, hating myself for it. The knocking answered immediately. Same pattern, same pace. I stepped away, heart pounding, and the sound followed, traveling along the wall, staying just behind me. I felt stupid fear rise, the kind you can't explain away. I picked up the radio and called the owner's number, but there was only static. When the knocking started again, it was different. Slower, intentional. Tap, tap, tap. A pause, then another sequence. I realized, with a sick drop in my chest, that it was forming a rhythm I recognized. It was spelling my name, the way kids knock letters in school, the way my brother used to tease me through walls when we were little. I backed toward the door, whispering no over and over. The knocks followed, keeping time, never rushing, never missing a beat. I shouted that I didn't understand, that I wanted it to stop. The wall answered by spelling my name again, louder this time, the sound vibrating through my bones. I ran. I didn't grab my coat, didn't lock anything. I burst out into the cold and stood there gasping, staring at the dark shape of the motel. From outside, everything was silent. No knocking, no movement. I stayed there until my fingers went numb, then forced myself back inside. The office was quiet. The wall was just a wall. I sat behind the desk and waited until dawn, jumpy at every sound. No more calls came. When the owner arrived later, I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, then nodded like he'd expected it. He told me the motel had been built over temporary housing from an old work camp. Heaters installed cheap, walls thin. He said people sometimes heard things in storms. He didn't meet my eyes. I quit the next day. Years later, I still wake up when I hear knocking, counting the rhythm before I even realize what I'm doing. I never hear my name anymore, but I know how close it came to answering back. I was already late rerouting when I pulled the bus onto the narrower road, the tires crunching differently beneath me, and the steering wheel vibrating in a way I didn't like. The radio kept cutting out, and I was doing the math in my head, wondering which stops I could safely skip without getting complaints. I told myself the kids would understand. Snow days were normal here. Detours were not. That was when I saw the shelter. It wasn't on my usual route, just a small bus stop set back from the road. The kind meant for maybe 1 or 2 kids from farms farther out. I slowed automatically, scanning for movement. No children. Just the shelter half buried, and a sheet of paper taped inside, fluttering slightly even though the air felt still. I don't know why I stopped. I could have driven past. Instead, I pulled over set the brake, and stepped down from the bus. The cold bit through my gloves as I walked up to the shelter. The paper was handwritten, lined notebook paper, taped carefully at all four corners. It was a list of names. First names and last initials, written neatly in blue ink, like a teacher's handwriting. I recognized some immediately. Kids I expected to see that morning. Others I didn't know as well, but had seen on attendance sheets. What caught my attention was the frost. Several names were crossed out, not with ink, but with thin white lines of ice, as if someone had traced over them with frozen breath. I stared at it longer than I should have. My radio crackled behind me, and I flinched hard. I pulled the paper closer to the glass, reading each name slowly. The crossed out ones felt wrong in my chest, like reading something private. I took my glove off and touched the paper. It was dry. The frost didn't melt. I went back to the bus and drove on, telling myself someone had played a joke. A teacher. A bored teenager. Anyone. The rest of the route passed in a blur. Fewer kids than usual showed up. One empty seat, I could explain. 2 made me uneasy. 3 made me start counting. That afternoon, the school office was loud in a tense way. I heard names repeated in low voices. Parents hadn't heard from their children. Delays, they said. Weather, they said. I stood there, coat half on, thinking about the paper taped to the shelter. I didn't say anything. I don't know why. Fear, maybe. Or the certainty that saying it out loud would make it real. The next morning, the storm hadn't fully cleared, but they sent us out anyway. I followed the same detour. I told myself I wouldn't stop. When the shelter came into view, my foot eased off the accelerator without my permission. I parked. I walked over. The paper was still there. More names were crossed out, not scribbled, not smudged, carefully traced in frost. The lines thicker now, deeper, like they had been gone over again and again. I scanned the list, my heart hammering. The new crossed-out names matched the kids who hadn't come home. I backed away from the shelter, shaking my head. I told myself this was coincidence stacked on coincidence, my mind trying to find patterns where there were none. I ripped the paper down, crumpled it in my hands. The frost stayed even as the paper bent. It didn't flake or melt. It felt like raised glass under my fingers. I threw it in the bus trash and drove. That afternoon, another child didn't return home. I went to the police station with the paper. I smoothed it out on the desk, hands sweating. The officer listened, his expression tight but patient. He asked where I found it. He asked who might have put it there. When he reached out to touch it, the frost had faded. Just blue ink and torn tape marks. He looked at me like he was deciding something, then thanked me and said they would follow up. The next morning, the shelter was empty. No paper. No tape. I felt a wave of relief so strong my knees went weak. By midday, they found the missing children. Not alive. The details came out slowly, carefully, but the pattern was unmistakable. Exposure. Distance. Each one found farther from the last, as if something had been leading them away from home step by step. I stopped driving buses that week. I told them I was sick. No one argued. Years later, I learned something they never put in the reports. The list had included my name too, at the bottom. I hadn't noticed at the time. It was crossed out last, lightly, as if whoever made it had hesitated. I was bent over the drift, flagging a clean line of elk tracks with orange tape. when I heard my own voice say my name softly, like I was standing just behind myself. I straightened so fast my neck popped, heart slamming, and spun around with my clipboard raised like it could protect me. There was nothing there but the slope of snow and the trees beyond it. I told myself it was fatigue. I had been out since early morning, moving slowly, counting steps, measuring prints, trying to prove I belonged on the survey team, despite being the odd one out that season. I forced a breath, wrote down the coordinates, and crouched again. The voice came back, clearer. It wasn't calling my name this time. It was giving directions. It said to shift left, just a little, because the tracks split there. That was true. I knew that because I had memorized the terrain map the night before, and because I always favored my right leg on slopes like this. No one else would have known that. I froze, pen hovering. My mouth went dry. I whispered hello without thinking, hating how small my voice sounded. The answer came immediately, muffled, like it was being spoken through layers of fabric. It told me I had missed a set of prints under the overhang of the snowbank beside me. I stepped back, boots sinking. The sound was coming from beneath the drift, from the compacted snow piled higher than my waist. I knelt and pressed my gloved hand against it. Solid, cold, no hollow. I laughed once, sharp and shaky, and said this wasn't funny, that I didn't have time for jokes. The voice replied that I never did. That stopped me cold. It wasn't mocking. It was tired. Familiar. It sounded exactly like me did when I talked to myself under stress. The cadence and pauses identical. It told me to keep moving, that the light would change soon, and I didn't want to be caught on the ridge when it did. I stood there arguing with myself, literally, telling the snowbank that it wasn't real, that I was hearing things. It responded by reminding me of the shortcut back to the truck, the one I hadn't told anyone about, because I didn't want to explain how I knew it. My hand started to shake. I took a step away. The voice told me not to. It said the ground ahead wasn't safe. I ignored it and moved anyway. The snow beneath my left foot shifted, a subtle give that made my stomach lurch. I jumped back just in time, heart in my throat, staring at a thin crack where the drift had settled over a shallow ravine. I backed away slowly, breath coming hard. The voice didn't gloat. It just said thank you, like it had been holding that in. I demanded to know what it was. The answer came after a pause, quieter now. It said it was me, or what was left of me. It said this wasn't the first time it had tried to help, just the first time I had listened. I remembered then, in a rush, all the moments I had shrugged off as intuition. The times I had changed roads at the last second, avoided accidents I couldn't explain. I had always told myself it was instinct or luck. Standing there, it felt like neither. The voice told me to finish the survey and go home. It gave me directions, precise and careful, pointing out hazards before I saw them. I followed, partly because I was terrified to stop listening. By the time I reached the truck, my legs were jelly and my head hurt from the effort of not screaming. I didn't tell anyone. I filed my report, left out the parts that mattered most. That night, lying awake, I heard my voice again, faint, telling me to lock the door, to check the stove, to sleep on my side because my breathing would be shallow. Weeks later, I learned why the snowbank had sounded so close. Another volunteer found remains beneath that drift. When it melted, bones weathered and old. The ID took time, but when it came back, the name matched the one I had been born with, the person I used to be before I transitioned, before I left town. I understood then. The voice wasn't trying to replace me. It was trying to keep me alive long enough to finish becoming myself. I still hear it sometimes, but only when I need to. I answer now, out loud, and it always falls silent, satisfied. I was drilling the hole again when I realized it wasn't where I left it, the auger biting into ice that should not have been marked yet. I stopped mid, turn, sweat already running down my back, despite the cold, and looked up at the cabin to get my bearings. The front steps were closer than they had been yesterday. Not by much, but enough that my stomach tightened. I stood there, auger still planted, and looked back across the lake. The old hole was gone, not frozen over. Gone. In its place was clean ice, unbroken, like no one had ever worked there. My gear, though, was here with me. The bucket, the stool, the sonar unit, all clustered around this new hole like obedient dogs. I told myself I had misremembered. Long weeks alone do that to you. I finished drilling, set my line, and fished like normal, but I kept glancing up at the cabin door. It felt closer, watching me. When I packed up and went inside, I measured the distance from the door to the hole, just to settle my nerves. I wrote it down on a scrap of paper and taped it by the sink. The next morning, the hole was closer again. This time, there was no denying it. My measurements didn't lie. The gear had moved too, frozen into the ice in new positions, dragged in a straight line toward the cabin. I crouched and ran my glove over the surface, looking for scrape marks, signs of pressure ridges. There were none. The ice was smooth, unbroken, except for the hole itself, perfectly round, dark water breathing slowly beneath. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out wrong. I filled in the hole with snow, packed it down hard, and drilled a new one farther out, well past the old spot. I carried the gear back myself, one piece at a time, making sure nothing was left behind. That night, I dreamed of dragging, of pulling something heavy that didn't want to come, inch by inch, always stopping just short of a line I couldn't cross. In the morning, the hole was back. Not the one I drilled last, the first one. It had returned, closer than ever, the packed snow gone, the edges clean. The new hole was missing entirely. My gear sat around the old one again, the bucket tipped on its side. Frozen bait spilled like black beads across the ice. I felt anger then, sharp and sudden. I shouted at the lake, at the trees, at whatever was listening. I kicked the bucket hard enough to hurt my foot. The water in the hole rippled, slow and deliberate, long after I stopped moving. I called another guide in town and told him something was wrong. He joked about ice shift and pressure, said I should take a few days off. When I told him the hole was moving uphill toward my cabin, he went quiet. He said the old stories talk about water that wants warmth. That follows it. I unplugged the stove that night. I shut off the generator. I sat in the dark, wrapped in blankets, listening. The ice groaned occasionally, but nothing else happened. I slept badly, waking at every imagined sound. The hole moved anyway. It was almost touching the bottom step now. Close enough that I could hear water moving when I lay in bed. A soft, patient sound like breathing. I didn't fish that day. I couldn't bring myself to get close. Instead, I tried to block it, shoveling snow between the hole and the cabin, piling it high. By evening, the snowbank had collapsed inward, slumping neatly into the water. It looked intentional. I understood then that it wasn't following the cabin. It was following me. Wherever I spent the most time, wherever my heat soaked deepest into the ice, that was where it wanted to be. Always stopping just short, like it was waiting for permission. I made a plan. I packed my truck before dawn, breath shaking, hands clumsy. I left the generator running, the stove on high, every light blazing. I drove away without looking back. I came back 1 week later with another guide and a knot in my chest. The cabin was standing, door intact. The ice hole was gone. No mark, no scar. The lake was smooth and dead and ordinary. Inside the cabin, everything was warm. Too warm. On the floor by the door was my bucket, dry, empty, placed carefully against the wall. I never guided on that lake again. I still fish, but never close to home. Water that learns your warmth doesn't forget it.